Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss of internet shitlords. And today I was, there's been a bit of a dearth lately of serious RPG controversy. We talked a little bit about some of them in the last show of Inappropriate Characters. If you missed that, you should check out the Inappropriate Characters channel. It was on Sunday, and there we talked about the Elminster Apology Tour, and we talked about the claims about Candela Obscura getting coverage from their bad reviews and stuff. So today, instead, I'm going to talk about a topic about gameplay and design, mostly gameplay, actually. And it's basically this. Combat is not the central defining characteristic of the role-playing game. It's not the central feature of what a campaign is or should be. And this is very, this is even slightly controversial if you're talking about D&D 5e, to say nothing of old school, right? Because in old school play, the dungeon crawl, all of that sort of thing. But the dungeon crawl isn't supposed to be mainly about combat. There's this illusion that is created, this argument that certain, what would we say, retrogrades like to make, right? That they say that in fact the traditional, the original RPG game was a war game and it was about fighting, and that the purpose was to go into these dungeons and kill monsters and take the treasure, right? But even that isn't strictly right. It's not entirely correct. You will note that in early D&D editions, you got XP for getting treasure. You also got XP for killing monsters, it's true, but much less. And so there was a very clear reward, a reward mechanic built into that assumption, which is that if you can get the treasure away from the monsters, whether or not you kill them, you get the bigger reward. So if let's say if you killed the monster but don't get any of his treasure, that is a poor choice that you would be making. On the other hand, if you got the treasure without killing the monster, it's a very good choice because you've avoided risking your own life. So this was made for people who are kind of sneaky scoundrels going in and trying to steal the treasure from the monster when it, from behind its back, So this was a role-playing element right from the very beginning of RPG play. There was also other elements to it too, of course, because a lot of dungeoneering was essentially about planning and resource management. So even though you probably weren't in like really old school dungeons, I mean, I'm running Tonisborg right now, and I'm running it completely. So I'm using the rules in the book, in the back of the book, that are a recreation in a way of Arnesen's rules, and it is totally dungeon crawl, right? That's what the player characters are doing. They're going in. They're covering a few rooms, trying to get some treasure. Once they got some, they go out, and all the rest of the world. I mean, it's set in Blackmore. I know enough about Blackmore, about where it was and what to do with it, right? But hardly anything of importance is happening in terms of the outside world. To them, their world is largely the tavern, and where they hire hirelings and add henchmen to their group, the shops. The houses that they've now purchased around there, that's basically just to either show off or store their loot, the church for the cleric, and that's basically it, right? So in terms of role play in the sense of huge social interactions, that's mostly happening between the players and those NPC hirelings that they got while they're going through the dungeon. And it's super fun, but a lot of the play is not really about getting into combat as it is about organizing and carefully planning how to survive a very dangerous environment, So right from the beginning, the idea that combat is the central feature of RPG play is not right. But I don't want you to think that I am here to bury combat. I will certainly praise it. In most of my games, there's combats in every session, or very, very frequently. I have no problem with a good fight in an RPG game. But what I would advise to DMs is that combat is not shouldn't actually be the main purpose of what your campaign is doing. There might be exceptions. I don't know if you're playing a war campaign, right? Like your characters are soldiers in a war, but even there, it's not necessarily the essential. Combat, especially in old school, doesn't take long to adjudicate. It'll never be unless you're doing tons of combat per session. It'll never be the majority of the time that is being spent. So worry about the other parts. And I will point out something else is that combat is very rarely the most memorable thing about a game session. And the most memorable game sessions, sometimes it might have to do with combat, but it isn't the combat itself that matters. For example, the lethality level of the combat is not necessarily what matters. It could matter if a long-standing player character dies, but then it's his death that's mattering, not the fight itself, right? And the people might not even think very much about what, like who he was fighting at the time. It's just that, oh, look, he died, right? And so this was a big deal. But more often than not, the combats that people remember are either because there's an epic setup to the combat that has to do with role play elements, right? Like this is your old nemesis and this is now your final encounter. So what matters about that is the fact that it is the final encounter. Or this is a situation where you're double crossed and it's an ambush and suddenly the person you thought was your friend has betrayed you or something. All those sorts of things are what help to make a combat memorable, right? If a combat is just fight, okay, and then that's it, there's nothing really happening out of there. The other time when combat gains memorable qualities are sometimes when things go ridiculously wrong, right? When it suddenly turns into slapstick for reasons of bad choices or pure accident, and then it just all ends up becoming funny and therefore memorable, right? So all of those things influence the memorability of a game. And at the same time, the things people will tend to remember most about the games are what they've actually done in their world and what their player character, obviously, for each person has accomplished in that world. And so having a lot of interaction with the world as a rule is a really good idea. Again, it can depend. My Tonnisborg campaign is basically just people going through the Tonnisborg dungeon, and that's what they want to do. It's going to be a very short campaign by my standards. So far, it's only been, I think 3-4 months, something like that. I don't remember when we started. I think we might have started in September, I think, if I'm not mistaken, right? And so it won't last until, I doubt it'll get to next September. So it's going to be a short campaign on my accounts anyways. And anyhow, the reality of the majority of games, though, is that you want there to be a mix of fight and a mix of activity. But the activity is where you're going to find potential for the things that are going to make your campaign more memorable. Don't make the mistake. This is the essence of what I'm arguing tonight. Don't make the mistake of thinking that having violent or tough fights is the same as making a memorable game. Okay, and to make a memorable game, though, you want to be very careful not to be, the would-be novelists, because that might make it memorable, but there's a very good chance if you're playing novelist with them, that is to say, you are just making a story and they're meant to be witnesses of it. And so you're going to drag them along through this story that they cannot, in fact, change, or that they're not even the stars of. And it's just there to see your really clever, fantasy novel that you never got to write. So now you've made it into a game. If you do that, it might be very memorable, but it'll be memorable for all the wrong reasons. It'll be that campaign that we didn't like because he did this, So what you have to do is you have to set up the world and give the players the opportunities to decide what they do in the world. And again, the sandbox solves almost all of this. Because if the players themselves want to go out and do a lot of dangerous adventuring and get into fights in a sandbox, that's what they'll do. If you make sure to give them the opportunity where that they can see where that is a reality, right? Like you let them know in the context of the world and through their characters where the action is. And then they can choose to go to the action, right? Or they might choose other things, right? And you've got to make sure to give them those other things too, to give them the environment where they can engage in, I don't know, political intrigues, crime, travel, wandering from place to place, diplomatic activity, military command, or court intrigues, or all of those things. Now, some of them may be more or less accessible to player characters at different times in their level and depending on their social class, right? But give them those opportunities and then let them pursue what their character should be interested in, right? Or their characters. This is the way that you then don't have to worry about setting up intricate adventures that you are pathing them through, right? Instead, what you do have to do is you have to have a well-prepared world, And if you do that, then you're going to see that there's probably a very good chance that your player characters might end up doing a lot more social interactions of different kinds, which can turn into adventure plots, right? Because an adventure also is not mostly combat. Every adventure will either have a quest element or an investigative element or a social dilemma element. There's got to be something else to it. It's not just, here's your adventure, it's combat, go kill this thing, that's it, right? You could have that, but that would be a very short and probably not very interesting adventure if that was the whole thing, right? If there was no intermediate steps, there was no hero's journey at all, So if you let the players handle it, they'll let you know how much action they want or how much interaction they want. In my Sword and Caravan campaign, the player characters have been traveling along the Silk Road, looking to contact Christian churches that have been lost to the Holy See, and along the way having a lot of different activities, right? So there are a lot of sessions of that campaign, which has been going on a couple of years now already. A lot of sessions where there isn't any combat, where what they're doing is traveling, going from one place to another and having to do, all the management of that, the resource management and whatnot. And a lot of times when they're doing essentially tourist stuff, they've reached a new place and they're going to go investigate the things in that place, right? And see what they can find. And some of those lead into adventure hooks. And they might be also looking to get new jobs, hear rumors, all kinds of things. And that's what the tables that are in Sword and Caravan are for, to help the DM to very quickly be able to provide answers when player characters in a sandbox want to go off and do their own thing in some area of exploration or another. They're getting themselves involved in the places they are before moving on, and because this is kind of a travel campaign. And then once in a while, they have sessions that are extremely combat focused, right? So it's not that this is a group that doesn't like that. They do like that. It's also that they're interested in playing out being in the world, and they find it really an interesting thing to do. In our last session this weekend, they actually had basically a dungeon crawl type combat heavy adventure, because as a result of their social interactions, they ended up getting caught up in a conspiracy to rescue the Sultan of the Seljuk Turks, the Sultan Togrul, who was basically a prisoner in his own palace at the hands of his evil vizier. And they joined this aged Sufi and this old warrior to break into the palace to rescue the young Sultan. And so it was a heist story, basically. They had to plan it all out, how they were going to get through there in a fortress that was almost maze-like. It was very, very, it was set up to be very challenging to break into and then very difficult to find your way around in it. They had made a lot of very useful ideas and plans that helped minimize the amount of opposition they were going to have. But in the end, of course, there was some big fights, including with a big bad guy, a general of the Seljuks that had betrayed the Sultan and also betrayed the NPCs that were with the characters. And it was really exciting. And also, because also the cleric wasn't there. So by the end of it, there were a few players and NPCs that were quite badly hurt and everything. And it was great. It was a great action scene. So I'm not saying I'm opposed to combat. What I am saying is that you as a DM have to understand that combat only gets to matter if it's about something other than just a fighting grind, right? If you're just doing fight, and none of those fights are actually significant to anything other than kill the thing to get the treasure, that's probably not going to be the ideal situation for your characters to be engaged in the world that they're in, right? And so you want to make sure that the fights matter. And the fights don't usually matter just because of how big they are or how violent they are. It matters because of what makes it matter to the players. And I guess that's it. That's the answer to this topic. And well, if you like this video, please share it anywhere you think people will find it interesting. Also where it'll piss people off. And I guess here it could probably piss off some of the woke crowd and some of the bro SR or something like that. But I guess we'll see. And if you like my stuff, if you like what I've done, check out the rest of my videos. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. And also, please check out my products. Right now, the Pundit Files, number 3, Renegade Song Martial Artist, is now out in the Red Room store. The link is in the description below. Be sure to check out my settings books like Sword and Caravan or Arrows of Indra and supplements like the Old School Companion that has all kinds of useful mechanics you can put into your game to make it a little more medieval authentic. And all the other products that I have, they're all on the list in the description below. You can check them out. And I guarantee that you're going to find great material for your gaming in my product. Also, Baptism of Fire, probably, we really hope by early next month, I'm thinking, at this point. Because again, we're at halfway mark now. We have not yet, as far as I know, the publisher has not yet sent it for the proofs to drive through. So that means it's basically impossible that it'll be out in January now. But I'm really, really hoping that early February will be it. So I guess we'll see. Anyways, that's everything for today. Currently smoking. This is a Lorenzetti egg plus Argento Natural.